Within the dark and mysterious underground of Hollywood, there lies many demons. Demons that consume the very soul of those seeking fame, fortune, and adventure. Young girls travel to the film capital of the world in the hopes of their discovery to star in major motion picture productions. One of these young girls sought to achieve fame through this manner, yet she would attain notoriety in Hollywood for an entirely different reason. She met one of those demons.
On the morning of January 15, 1947, suburban Los Angeles housewife Betty Bersinger left her home with her 3-year-old daughter on her way to run some errands. The two of them walked along Norton Avenue in Leimert Park at the south end of Los Angeles. Along the way, for their leisurely stroll, Bersinger and her daughter passed several vacant lots. The area where they walked had several of these lots, as a local developer had purchased the land in the hopes of building several speculation houses. Bersinger and her daughter approached the corner of 39th Street, and when they reached the corner, they noticed a large white object in the field adjacent to the street. At first, Bersinger believed it to be a mannequin, but as she got closer, she screamed and walked swiftly away from the scene with her daughter in tow. Immediately after arriving home, she telephoned the police and informed them of the discovery of a mutilated corpse. When the police arrived at the scene, they found the body of a young woman who had been severed in half just above the waist, and the corpse had been placed in different suggestive poses. Authorities noted that the body contained numerous small cuts, including one that sliced across her face that ran from the corners of her mouth to her ears, giving her a disfigured grin. In the follow-up police report, Sergeant H.L. Hansen recorded what he observed surrounding the crime scene and stated that the body had been dead less than 10 to 12 hours, as rigor mortis had not set in. The body had been cleanly severed at the midline, and the lower half was lying about 1 foot to the south of the upper half. Sergeant Hansen noted that the crime scene lacked any blood, denoting that the corpse had been completely drained of blood before the body had been disposed. Because of the lack of blood, stains, or smears of blood on the body, it appeared that the corpse had been washed prior to disposal. One facet in particular caught the sergeant's attention. The mouth was badly slashed approximately 3 inches each way from the corners, and the upper lip was deeply lacerated on the right-hand side. The marks noted by Sergeant Hansen on the victim's face resembled a grotesque smile. Again, due to the lack of blood at the scene, detectives deduced that the victim had been killed elsewhere and moved to that scene. Additionally, investigators determined that the victim had been hanged by her wrists at some point and endured some excruciating torture prior to her death. The marks made on the body, noted by Sergeant Hansen, indicated that authorities were dealing with someone infatuated with necrophilia and knives. It appeared that a lustful, sadistic murderer was at large in the city of Los Angeles. The corpse also contained a rose tattoo on her upper left thigh. Immediately upon the discovery of the corpse, newspapermen and spectators alike swarmed the scene. The police desperately wanted to identify the victim, and with the help of the Los Angeles Herald-Express, used some new technology to get the fingerprints from the body to the FBI. This sound photo technology worked more like a fax machine, and the Los Angeles police were able to get the fingerprints to the top law enforcement agency in the country. Within 48 hours, an identification came back that would generate a mystery as to why she was killed and the identity of the perpetrator, generating many myths about the motive and means by which the young lady had been dispatched. The young woman identified with the fingerprints was Elizabeth Short, 22 years old, from Massachusetts. Investigating Elizabeth Short and her history would produce many leads and brought to the forefront the seedier side of life in Los Angeles in the 1940s. Born on July 29, 1924, Short grew up in a household of a mother and a father and 4 sisters. Short's father made a living designing and building golf courses, but abandoned the family when the Great Depression hit in 1929. Phoebe Short, Elizabeth's mother, then had to work several jobs in order to support her and her 5 daughters. During the course of her brief life, Elizabeth went by several nicknames: Betty, Bet, or Beth, and was often described by people who knew her as kind, pretty, and funny. Elizabeth had some distinctive features that made her stand out, predominantly her raven dark hair and bright blue eyes. With dreams of becoming a famous actress, Elizabeth moved to California to be with her father in the latter part of 1942. But the relationship soon became strained and she moved away, only to return a short while later with her concentration more aggressive in becoming a famous actress. Short's father, Cleo Short, stated that Elizabeth had a bad habit of running around, and he would not tolerate that type of behavior from his daughter. At the time that police interviewed Mr. Short, he appeared intoxicated and refused to appear at the coroner's office to substantiate his daughter's identity. When Elizabeth returned to Los Angeles, she worked as a waitress and dated several men and eventually fell into the partying lifestyle of the area. At the age of 19, Elizabeth was arrested, fingerprinted, and a mugshot taken for public intoxication and underage drinking. The mugshot was later used to confirm her identity after the discovery of her body. Elizabeth was last seen alive on January 9, 1947, and as the investigation intensified, more details of her tragic life would end up becoming public. At the time of her body's discovery and the sensationalism of the press at the time, they dubbed Elizabeth the Black Dahlia, due to the information that surfaced that had transformed from an innocent girl seeking fame in Hollywood to a woman whose romances changed her to a man-crazy delinquent. Most believe that the moniker originated with the film noir of the 1940s by that title, that told the story of a dark beauty who had a penchant for sheer black dresses. Others believed Elizabeth received the name due to her strikingly dark hair. The Los Angeles Times proclaimed that several of her co-workers came up with the nickname. Whatever the origins of this dark designation, it stuck and became infamous throughout crime history. On January 23, 1947, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner received an anonymous telephone call from someone claiming to be the killer, complaining about the way the newspaper covered the story, and then offered to send some of the victim's belongings to the newspaper. In the following next days, the Herald-Examiner received a package that contained Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, some photos, business cards, and an address book, along with a letter pasted together with magazine letter clippings that read, "Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers, here is Dahlia's belongings." As the investigation into Elizabeth's demise continued, police received several hundred tips as to who may have been the perpetrator, but most of them could be discounted. Initially, and this has been half-heartedly discounted, that the person or persons who murdered Elizabeth Short had medical knowledge due to the precision cuts made to the body and the way she was bisected. Investigators then determined that in order to find Short's killer, they would have to canvass all over the country. It seemed that Short traveled all over the U.S. in search of a suitable climate for her condition. Short suffered from an acute bronchial condition that caused great discomfort. Authorities learned that Short once lived in Florida, Georgia, Long Beach, and Los Angeles, all in a search for the perfect environment for her malady. Short's reputation amongst the in-the-know sect of Hollywood confirmed that the raven-haired beauty saw no less than 4 men a day. She teased them, got rides from them, places to sleep, clothes, and money, but then refused to have sex with them. Once these facts became public, although her murder was horrific and sadistic, the public maintained that Short may have deserved such a mutilation with the way she treated men. Perhaps she ran into a man who would not take no for an answer, and then decided to take his revenge in desecrating her body in a very horrendous manner. Authorities estimated that Short knew at least 50 men, and 25 of them had been seen with the young girl within 60 days of her death. The reality of Elizabeth Short was that she tried desperately to find a husband, a home in a nice suburban area, and finally, happiness. This search for the perfect life led Short to start cavorting with some of the seedier men in Hollywood. Short started seeing a man named Mark Hansen, a rich and powerful Hollywood figure at the time. Hansen was the proprietor of a dozen movie theaters and was the part owner of the Florentine Gardens on Hollywood Boulevard. Hansen also operated a secret gambling casino behind Florentine Gardens. Shady, to say the least. One contemporary stated that Hansen worked in a shadowy hinterland between legitimate business and the fringes of the LA underworld. The sleaze with which Hansen operated had to do with grooming young girls for either prostitution or exotic dancing. At the Florentine Gardens, he kept an active harem of girls for either his delight or men he tried to impress. When Hansen approached Elizabeth Short, he courted her for 10 days, and tired of her repeated insistence that she was a virgin and her endless stream of boyfriends, Hansen gave up. Hansen then went his own way after seeing he could not crack the young girl's exterior. Over 500 people confessed to the murder, and investigators searched every nook and cranny in Short's life to determine who may have wanted the young girl dead. Although the authorities lacked any shortage of suspects, some of them were spotlighted due to their previous behaviors. One of these, folk singer Woody Guthrie, was once indicted in New York for sending obscene letters to young ladies. Guthrie became a suspect because of the hysteria that radiated from the case and because of the murder's sensationalism. But investigators discovered that he was nowhere near Los Angeles at the time of the murder. Most leads proved dead ends until late 1948. Dr. Joseph Paul DeRiver, a psychiatrist employed through the Los Angeles Police Department, coaxed the killer out of hiding, and the someone claiming to be Short's murder, a rather convincing suspect, wrote Dr. DeRiver a letter. The psychiatrist planted an article in a pulp crime magazine, True Detective, in order to lure the killer to the surface. Dr. DeRiver's stated methodology followed: a deep-seated compulsion to publicize and claim recognition for his act. In October 1948, a letter arrived for Dr. DeRiver at the LAPD Central Headquarters with a return address in Miami Beach, Florida. A person named Jack Sand signed the letter and stated that he was associated with the person who fitted the pattern of the infamous one. Jack Sand stated that he had been associated with the killer for 2 months while in San Francisco, and the man had the motive for the killing and knew the characters involved. Sand also volunteered his services in order to apprehend the killer. The LAPD set up meetings between Dr. DeRiver and Sand in Las Vegas, but logistical problems interfered with the two men meeting there. 2 police officers were assigned to Dr. DeRiver and acted as his driver and bodyguard during the whole incident to draw Sand out for his assistance. The true identity of Jack Sand was actually Leslie Dillon, an errand boy for Mark Hansen. Allegedly, when Hansen became tired of Short's demands for money and her boyfriends, he enlisted Dillon to get rid of her. Dillon had been characterized as a dangerous and murderous psychopath. What interested police about Dillon that made him a prime suspect for the murder is that he knew 2 things about Short's demise that were never revealed to the public: the rose tattoo on Short's thigh that had been excised by the killer and placed with her female parts, and the cutting of her pubic hair where they were placed inside of her rectum. Moreover, Dillon worked briefly in a mortuary and became familiar with how to make the cut on the leg of a corpse to cause the bleeding out of the blood volume. Dillon also named another man who could be a suspect, a man named Jeff Connors. Dillon suggested to Dr. DeRiver that the killer bisected the body in order to determine how his sex organ would reach into Short's lower body. Dillon also hinted that the crime had been committed in a hotel, a ground-level hotel, so that the murderer could get the body outside without carrying it downstairs. Later documentation proved that a cabin at the Astor Motel in Los Angeles contained nothing but gore from the bed to the bathroom. The hotel manager, a man named Henry Hoffman, discovered some bloody women's clothing, and instead of reporting the incident, he investigated the hotel room and cleaned it for himself. It turns out that Hoffman had been arrested a few days earlier on a domestic relations disturbance and did not want any further difficulties with the police. There existed some reports that Hoffman had been seen with Short prior to her murder, but these reports remained unsubstantiated. Later, the owners admitted that they did discover a room at the hotel that was covered in the gore described much later in time. So, the assumption that Elizabeth Short's murder took place at a different location than that of where the body had been dumped held more credence with this discovery. Dr. DeRiver then requested that Dillon remove his shirt. The psychiatrist noted that Dillon had a very muscular physique. When asked to drop his pants in order to view Dillon's manhood, the informant at first hesitated, and then when he removed his trousers, Dr. DeRiver noted that Dillon possessed the penis of an 8-year-old boy. One of the letters that Dillon wrote to Dr. DeRiver made the point that the murderer had been mocked by Short, and she threatened exposure to his friends regarding his lack of manhood. The psychiatrist knew he had his man, yet the investigation suffered from another peripheral case that changed the course of discovering the real murderer of Elizabeth Short in the summer of 1949. At this time, the LAPD was proven to be rotten to the core, and a failed effort to eliminate the corruption was underway at the time. All of this as the police looked for a stone-cold killer. Dillon stated that he would not make a statement and reveal the real name of the murderer unless they brought him in for questioning. If they arrested him, he promised to talk to the authorities as he knew where the bodies were buried. History never recorded any disposition as to Dillon after he made this offer to the police.
The hunt for Elizabeth Short's killer continued as police did not know where to turn. Several suspects had been interviewed, but each proved to meet with dead ends. But observers noted that the LAPD may have missed some clues as to the identity of the real murderer. They put constant pressure on those they questioned, and in those days we know what that meant. Police extracted confessions of suspects who were not even near the crime scene or in the same state where the murder occurred. Of the 500 individuals that police questioned, the following suspects really stood out in the minds of authorities and still continue to pose serious questions surrounding the death of Elizabeth Short to the present day.
Robert Manley was a hardware salesman that dated Short for a time. Some eyewitnesses placed him in Short's company just prior to her death. Manley had a history of mental instability, which made him very suspicious to authorities. Detectives later confirmed his alibi for January 14th and 15th, clearing him of any suspicion. Dr. Walter Bailey became familiar with Short's sister, Virginia. Many believed that Bailey had a degenerative brain disease that caused periodic bouts of homicidal ideation, even in the most docile human beings. Some historians have postulated that because Short may have been short on cash and moving around a lot at the time of her death, she may have contacted Dr. Bailey in an attempt to borrow some money. Dr. Bailey, as a matter of fact, specialized in liposuction, hysterectomies, and amputations. Short often received money from men by giving them some sort of sob story where she said her husband died in the war and left her destitute. Investigators theorized that Dr. Bailey may have seen through Short's lie and became enraged at a very bad time in his illness, and he punished her for her lying. Historians have a tendency to speculate when they attempt connections between historical events. One of the most bizarre and horrendous killers that left investigators and historians scratching their heads was the Cleveland Torso Killer, or the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. These murders occurred in the 1930s and baffled then Cleveland Director of Public Safety Eliot Ness. It was the one case he could never solve. From 1934 to 1938, the Butcher of Kingsbury Run viciously murdered more than 12 people, often emasculating and or decapitating them before disposing of the bodies. Most of these victims worked in the sex industry at the time, and certain parts of their anatomy were never found. The victims were dismembered much like Elizabeth Short, and many believed that the killer resurfaced in Los Angeles as well as other American cities over the years. The Butcher of Kingsbury Run penned a letter where he stated that he moved to Los Angeles and buried some of the heads he took with him from Cleveland. Both the victims of the Butcher and Elizabeth Short appeared to have been tortured and exsanguinated prior to the disposal of the bodies. Additionally, both Short and the Cleveland victims had been washed before the bodies had been dumped. But Short was not decapitated like the other victims. Brush bristles had been found under her skin, and a butcher knife was alleged to have been the murder weapon in both the Kingsbury Run murders and the murder of Elizabeth Short. In late 1950, the LAPD received a long-distance telephone call from Oakland, California, where a young lady, obviously feeling guilty for a bad act, wanted to confess to the murder of Elizabeth Short. This young lady called the Oakland Tribune and stated she wanted to tell the whole story of her motive, means, and opportunity surrounding the crime. Christine Mary Reynolds, a 35-year-old mother of 3, confessed to murdering Elizabeth Short, turning herself in to the Oakland Police Department, and they held her for questioning so that the LAPD could question her further. According to the LAPD memorandum on the telephone conversation, Reynolds stated that she murdered Short with a knife and then cut her up with that same knife. Reynolds admitted that she preferred the company of women over men and had several liaisons with female movie stars in Hollywood. Reynolds stated that the time she went to Hollywood, she and Short lived together, and then Short informed her that she met a man. Reynolds then became enraged and decided to murder Short. Investigators determined that Reynolds merely fantasized about different women and definitely did not murder Short. One of the most commonsensical allegations actually came from a former LAPD detective named Steve Hodel. Hodel first came to prominence when he accused his own father, Dr. George Hodel, of the Elizabeth Short murder. Hodel stated that he had been piecing together the case against his father for over 2 decades and had written about accusing his relation of the crime. Over the summer of 2018, more evidence appeared when Hodel came into the possession of a letter written by an informant named W. Glenn Martin. Martin's granddaughter, Sandy Nichols, discovered the letter in her house over the summer of 2018 and contacted Hodel. The former detective discovered some photographs in 1999 within his late father's belongings that portrayed a woman he believed bore a striking resemblance to Elizabeth Short. Hodel also discovered some handwritten letters to the Los Angeles Police Department from a man who claimed to be Short's murderer. The handwriting, after analysis, Hodel claims matches his father's handwriting. Steve Hodel also stated that the manner in which the mutilations took place to Elizabeth Short match a technique that his father would have learned in medical school, hemicorporectomy. This, in layman's terms, means that the body had been cut in half without the use of a bone saw. Rather, the murderer cut Short through the discs in her back. This procedure is consistent with the mutilations Short suffered. Hodel went through newspaper archives and witness interviews from the case, and even had to go through Freedom of Information Act requests in order to gain access to records that no one had seen for almost 70 years. Hodel also accessed the FBI files on the case. Since he was no longer a member of the LAPD, he could not gain access to the official department files. Hodel also searched the UCLA archives under his father's name and discovered a plethora of receipts regarding some renovations his father made to his childhood home. In that folder, Hodel discovered a receipt dated a couple of days before the murder for a large bag of concrete, the same brand of concrete found on Short's body. Investigators believe the murderer used the bag to transport her body. By the time Hodel assembled his research in order to compile his book, most of the investigators had already died. But he did reconstruct conversations these investigators had with third parties. While a Los Angeles Times columnist named Steve Lopez requested official police files about the case, he discovered a suspects list, and Dr. George Hodel was one of 6 prime suspects on that list. The police monitored Hodel's activities and even bugged his house in 1950. One of the conversations that took place, Dr. Hodel stated, "Realized there was nothing I could do. Put a pillow over her head and cover her with a blanket. Get a taxi. Expired 12/59. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, they may have figured it out. Killed her. Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." Even though this revelation stood as strong evidence that his father was the murderer, Hodel continued to research his father. Hodel stated that he found dozens of other murders that matched the signature of the Black Dahlia and could implicate his father as the killer. Dr. George Hodel actually moved to South America, and a Black Dahlia-style murder occurred there that drew a great deal of attention in the 1960s. Steve Hodel stated that the reason why his father murdered Elizabeth Short was that he dated her at one time and was motivated by jealousy. Insanely motivated jealousy. Steve Hodel learned during a recent television program on an investigation into the old Hodel residence that his father had a secret soundproof room installed within the middle of the house. Additionally, Dr. Hodel had been charged with incest with one of his daughters in 1949. After he was acquitted, he left the country. Although speculation with some documentary evidence has emerged as to the real identity of Elizabeth Short's murderer, it will remain a mystery, much like Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer. All of these mysteries tantalize those that have researched unsolved murders, but the victims still cry out for justice. Will it ever materialize?
Dr. George Hodel was known as a fixer amongst the Hollywood set. He performed pregnancy terminations for young starlets or powerful men trying to hide their extramarital affairs from their gold-digging wives. Additionally, his office was located not too far from a funeral home in downtown Los Angeles where he could practice his mutilation skills. The fact that Dr. Hodel made the suspect list and was not pursued further denotes his connections to either police officials or the political machinations of Hollywood. Along with other historical unsolved murders, the Black Dahlia case is one of the more interesting. It is hard to discern as to whether this interest has anything to do with the alleged cover-up, or rather it has to do with the horrendous nature of the crime. Hypotheses abound when it comes to this case, and it takes much more than just the armchair detective to provide a breakthrough. Even though there have been some historians who may have come close, this is one of those instances where a needed, authentic confession would help in making the case for one suspect or the other. Until next time.